Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. As the war in Ukraine grinds on, the G7 has reaffirmed its commitment to Kyiv's recovery and condemned Russia's aggression. In a joint statement, the group pledged to keep $300 billion in Russian assets frozen until Moscow ends the war and pays for the damage. However, the lack of explicit US confirmation raises questions about unity. Joining us now to discuss these developments is Krzysztof Piech, professor at Lazarski University. Professor, welcome to TVP World and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so your overview of this statement, how effective is it going to be, in your opinion, and why has it taken so long for the G7 to produce it?
First of all, this is a preparatory meeting for the most important meeting that will take place in about 3 weeks, also in Canada, about 50 miles from the place where the meeting was previously held. So that was the meeting of the Ministers of Finance and the governors of the central banks to prepare the, let's say, financial matters. And then the political decisions will follow, including Donald Trump's, whose decisions are quite unpredictable, even especially recently when we speak about new tariffs that he has announced. So that was a very important meeting because, first of all the G7 countries confirmed that the Russian assets will be frozen, and that's a huge amount of money. It is not enough to completely rebuild Ukraine if these assets are to be used for this purpose. But anyway, it's a huge amount of money that should motivate Russia to finally stop the war. Okay, so yes, it is a huge amount of money, maybe not enough to rebuild. The World Bank says $524 billion are needed. Nonetheless, it's still taken 3 years to do something that one would have thought was quite an obvious thing to do, you know, when they saw Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. These assets were already frozen, and they are frozen.
Yes, but why has it taken so long to issue this statement?
Recently, in June this year, the previous decision expires. So it has to be renewed and give the legal background for the Euroclear in Belgium to prolong the freezing of the assets. Without this decision, that would be a problem because in about a month, the money, these Russian assets would have to be returned to Russia. So that was a very important meeting.
Okay, so they were about to be returned.
Yes,
okay.
Because the previous decision was to expire next month.
Understood. What does that tell you about the unity of the G7 countries on this decision? Have they always been aligned in terms of freezing these assets?
Yes, so far we didn't have any major problems with that, apart from a few statements of President Trump, who said that not having Russia anymore in G7 was a mistake.
Right.
And with Russia, together with G7, I can't believe that these countries would make the same decisions. So the unity of G7 was kept, and that's good for the Ukraine and also for Polish prosperity as well.
Understood. Now, let's talk about President Trump. He hasn't explicitly endorsed the statement. However, he is attending the G7 meeting in June. Is he implicitly endorsing it by attending?
We can't predict what he will finally say, because we see during last weeks that he has changed his mind so many times that it's difficult to say anything. But on this meeting, there were the officials from the United States, including the governor of the Fed and the chief of the kind of Minister for Finance of the United States. So with their decision, I think the unity of G7 will still be kept during the next meeting of G7.
Okay. Now, Russia's response, what do you think it'll be?
they can't say anything about that. They can complain, but they don't have any both legal and economic grounds to do anything with that. They had 3 years to do anything, but they couldn't. Still, the money will be kept frozen until the decision will be changed.
Okay, now I understand that. However, isn't the G7 setting a dangerous precedent? In other words, could something similar be done in the future against an aggressor or any other country for whatever reason, you know, the holders of the assets might choose?
That's the very delicate thing. So we should remember that we don't speak about confiscation of assets. That would be very, very dangerous, because it will send a signal to all the countries that the money which any autocratic country keeps in the Western countries is not safe. But we don't speak about confiscation. We use about freezing the money and return this money later on under some conditions that will be discussed in the future. And the next G7 meeting will also be about innovative financial instruments that can be introduced. Maybe some reparation bonds, maybe some other measures. We'll see.
Yes, well, I mean, is the money going to be returned? I mean, there is talk of it being used to rebuild Ukraine, isn't there?
And there are no detailed plans how to use this money, but for sure we know that the money can be confiscated in full scale. However, also Ukraine needs a kind of compensation for the damages that were caused. So the money can't be also paid to Russia too early, because it will help Russians to build the army and threaten European peace. So I think that these assets will be released gradually, year after year. Some amounts of money will be sent to Russia if the peace is kept.
Understood. Okay, so now up until now there's been talk also of using the interest on this capital to supply Ukraine with reconstruction funds and military aid and so on. Is that continuing?
Yes, so far we could see the situation that it is estimated that last year the interests were about $7 billion, and this money went actually for to help Ukrainians. So we should also expect that in the future the interest will be paid directly to Ukraine. But the matter is about the principle, the main funds. What should we do? What the G7 will do with this? And this is something that we'll be discussing in about 3 weeks.
Right. Okay, so if the money were to be returned, or when, I should say, based on what you've just told us, to Russia, what's stopping Russia from simply, repeating its aggression once it's got its money back? I mean,
and this is something that it is not only the economic matter that it wasn't discussed officially, at least during recent days, but will be discussed in about 2-3 weeks, because yes, we can't give the money to Russians too early, because that would threaten the European peace. However, the money should be returned, because otherwise it will violate international laws.
Okay, now how much difference, if any, has the freezing of these assets made to the Russian economy?
It's a huge amount of money. With these sums, it's comparable to the budget that Russia spends on military, on the whole aggression. So we could imagine that with this amount of money, Russia could prolong the war by about 2-3 years even. So it is a very substantial amount of money. That's why G7 has made this decision.
Right, so the $300 billion is actually reducing Putin's ability to wage war. Do you think it's having an impact on him wanting to come to the negotiating table, or not really, because they're finding other sources of
So far, he didn't send any signals that he's very interested in these amounts of money. Partly because the Bank of Russia has had its reserves, but they are expiring. We can estimate that Russia has funds maybe for the next few months only to finance war efforts. So maybe that would finally put some pressure, more serious pressure on Putin to end the war.
Understood. Now, the 17th round of sanctions are being introduced against Russia, focusing on supplies of gas and oil from Russia to earn revenues. How effective do you think these sanctions will be? Will that substantially increase the pressure on Putin? Because the previous 16 haven't seemed to, anyway.
Yeah, the problem is that there are so many creative ways for Russians to overcome these problems through Kazakhstan, through other countries, even from China. However, we can see that China hesitated. Some companies have withdrawn from the cooperation with Russia. And what's also important, G7 has announced that any company that cooperates with Russia now will be excluded from reconstruction of Ukraine. So that is a clear signal to all the Chinese companies, Indian or other companies, that they should keep away from any business with Russia.
Because they want to be involved in the reconstruction.
Yes, of course.
Even though there are reports of China providing Russia with dual-use equipment, yes, which can be used for military purposes. Well, that's interesting. Now, in terms of going forward, I'd like you to look into the crystal ball, if you would, Professor, and tell us in the last few seconds that we have available, and tell us briefly what you think might, economically speaking, bring Putin to the table.
I think that anyway, after the war ends, because finally it will end one day, both also Russia will need some money to rebuild its economy, and with this asset that could be transferred from Belgium mostly to Russia, that will stimulate Putin to focus on economy, on business matters.
Right.
So, and especially Trump is counting on that because he wants to do businesses with Russia as well.
Understood. Professor Piech, thank you very much indeed for coming along and sharing your analysis with our audience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.